Welcome, future pastors, missionaries, and ministry students, to this explainer. Today, we're stepping into what I really like to call a masterclass on sacrificial discipleship. We aren't just, looking back at history today. We're actually examining a blueprint for the Christian calling itself. We're going to explore the life of Elisabeth Elliot. She was an American Christian missionary, author, and teacher. And her life, well, it became one of the absolute most powerful modern testimonies of faith, radical forgiveness, and unflinching obedience to God. Seriously, if you're preparing for ministry right now, her life is basically a required text.
Okay, let's dive into this explainer's syllabus. We're going to trace Elliot's journey from a college student all the way to a global teacher across 5 key areas. First up, the foundation of a calling. Second, the cost of discipleship. Third, radical forgiveness in action. Fourth, wisdom for the church. And finally, number 5, we're going to extract some core lessons for your ministry.
All right, Part 1, Foundation of a Calling. So before the crisis hits, there's always the preparation phase, right? Let's look at the ideal phase of her life and why building a foundation on prayer and scripture matters so incredibly much for your own path. Elisabeth Howard was born in December 1926 in Brussels, where her missionary parents were temporarily serving, but she was actually raised in the U.S. in a deeply, deeply Christian home. For you seminarians watching, definitely take note here. From a very early age, the Bible, prayer, and a deep love for world missions were the absolute center of her family life. That foundation completely propelled her to Wheaton College, where she studied classical Greek, and it was there that she met a fellow student named Jim Elliot. Both of them sensed this profound, undeniable call to missionary service. But, and here is a really vital lesson in obedience for us, they waited patiently before getting married. They firmly believed that obedience to God's timing was absolutely essential. After they finally did marry, they entered their early ministry working right among the Quichua people. They were painstakingly learning the language, helping establish Christian communities, basically doing all that really hard foundational work.
Moving right along to Part 2, the cost of discipleship.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that, as anyone in ministry will tell you, abstract theology inevitably meets brutal reality. And this brings us to the crisis of her narrative. In January of 1956, Jim Elliot and 4 fellow missionaries, Nate Saint, Ed McCulley, Peter Fleming, and Roger Huaorani, sought to make peaceful contact with the extremely isolated Huaorani people. This was a tribe with basically little to no previous interaction with outsiders. Tragically, all 5 of these men were killed by members of the Huaorani during this attempt to build a relationship. This event sent an absolute shockwave through Christians around the entire world. It literally became one of the most widely known missionary stories of the 20th century. For Elisabeth, this sudden, just totally devastating loss became the ultimate, unimaginable test of her faith and her calling.
Which leads us to Part 3, radical forgiveness in action.
This right here brings us to the reversal of the story. This is the exact moment when her seminary theology was put to the ultimate practical test. I want to pose this incredibly heavy question directly to you, the future leaders of the church. How does a missionary respond to the murder of her husband? I mean, human nature screams for revenge, right? Or at the very least, a bitter retreat away from the pain. But Elisabeth Elliot chose an entirely unthinkable path. She proved that love for enemies reflects the very heart of Christ. Instead of responding with bitterness, she chose extraordinary, almost incomprehensible forgiveness.
And this brilliantly illustrates her methodology of grace. Just 2 years after her husband's death, Elisabeth made the completely extraordinary decision to move directly into a Huaorani village. Alongside Rachel Saint, she actually went to live among the very people who had killed her husband. Think about that. She learned their language, she shared the gospel, she taught the Bible, she built real, genuine friendships, and she even helped establish a Christian fellowship there. And the outcome of this radical obedience? Well, over time, many of the Huaorani people embraced Christianity, and that actually included several of the very men who had participated in the killings of the missionaries. It is, without a doubt, one of the clearest modern examples of loving your enemies in total obedience to Christ.
Let's transition to Part 4, Wisdom for the Church.
Entering this legacy phase, we can see exactly how her faithfulness in the crucible granted her the deep, earned authority to speak to the broader church. After returning from Ecuador, Elisabeth became one of the most respected Christian authors of her entire generation. She wrote more than 20 highly influential books. Through Gates of Splendor tackled obedience and forgiveness, Passion and Purity dealt with purity and suffering, and Shadow of the Almighty deeply explored God's sovereignty and Christian discipleship. The thing is, she wasn't writing from some ivory tower. She was writing straight from the trenches. Because she had lived through such profound suffering, she had the real authority to challenge millions of Christians to trust God's sovereignty and embrace a life of sacrificial discipleship.
But it wasn't just books. Beyond her writing, Elisabeth hosted a daily radio program called Gateway to Joy, which reached listeners all around the globe for many years. She was constantly being invited to speak at churches, universities, and major conferences. What made her teaching so impactful for students and pastors alike was her totally unique combination of absolute clarity, biblical depth, and just highly practical wisdom. She constantly, persistently encouraged believers to follow Christ faithfully, regardless of what it might cost them.
And her endurance through suffering definitely didn't end in Ecuador. Later in life, she married Addison Leach, but tragically lost him to cancer in 1973. Several years later, she married Lars Gren, but throughout all of this, through literally every single season of loss and transition, she just kept writing, kept speaking, and intentionally kept mentoring younger Christians. She remained a steadfast guide until her declining health finally led her into retirement. Elisabeth Elliot passed away on June 15, 2015, in Magnolia at the age of 88, leaving behind an incredible legacy that continues to influence Christian workers worldwide today.
Finally, we arrive at Part 5, Lessons for Your Ministry. I really want you to treat these final insights like the core syllabus text for your own future ministry. First up, the will of God is never exactly what you expect it to be. So the crucial point is, as you head into missions or pastoral work, you're going to have a plan. You'll have a vision of how things should go. But you absolutely must release your rigid expectations. God's sovereignty means His timing and His methods will often surprise you. And as Elliot showed us so vividly, sometimes they will break your heart before they heal it. You just have to trust His will over your expectations.
Here's your rapid-fire charge for today. Wherever you are, be all there. In ministry, it is so incredibly easy to look ahead to the next church, the next promotion, the next big mission field, or, just to wallow in the difficulty of your current assignment. Elliot's life basically demands that we remain completely present and fully faithful in exactly the place God has currently assigned us, no matter how difficult or obscure it might feel in the moment.
Also, when you face suffering in your ministry, and let's be real, you will, remember this. Faith does not eliminate questions, but faith knows where to take them. True discipleship doesn't mean you won't experience doubt or agony. It just means you take those agonizing questions directly back to the sovereignty of God, just exactly as Elisabeth did when she lost Jim.
I want to conclude this explainer and leave you with a sort of final exam reflection, adopting one of her absolute most heavy-hitting quotes. She said, "To be a follower of the crucified means, sooner or later, a personal encounter with the cross." So my closing question to you as you step into your calling is simply this. Are you prepared? Are you truly prepared for the real cost of discipleship? Elisabeth Elliot's life teaches us that faithfulness often has a ripple effect far beyond what we could ever see in our own lifetime. Embrace courageous faith, sacrificial love, and unwavering obedience. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep this masterclass in mind as you go forward in your own ministries.